G'day everyone, ScottyD here from the Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into the next installment in our new series, From Sprue to Tabletop. Alrighty, so this next installment that we're going to be looking at, taking your miniatures from the sprue to getting them on your tabletop, getting games in with them. We're going to be looking at today, talking about the assemblies, sub-assemblies, and priming, so that you're able to start painting up your miniature, and we'll be getting into actually starting to paint up this assault intercessor in the next few videos as well. But today we're going to be diving into a lot of different information and a lot of different thinking that I've done whenever I've gone to build models, whether it's full assembly, sub-assemblies, and also the conditions in which you want to do some priming. So to start off with, we are going to jump straight in to doing some assembly for this assault intercessor. Alrighty everyone, so we are just going to jump on straight into it, and as you can see, we have got our trusty hobby knife, one of our flat files, and we've got some paper towel off to the side as well, which is going to be very useful. And then we have got our plastic glue. Now, I particularly do like the Revell Contactor Professional brand of plastic glue. Once I started using this brand, I didn't look back. I've used Army Painter, I've used Games Workshop. In terms of plastic glue, I would have to say Revell is got to be the best on the market. So if you are able to grab this glue, it's going to come in very handy. But before we even get to that stage of the project, what we're actually going to start off with is doing something that I call dry fitting. Now, you might not be able to do this with a lot of miniatures because they won't have some of these pins, as you can see there, that this miniature does. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put this miniature together, but we're not going to glue it at all. Now, something I have done after we cleaned up the model, but before starting this video, is I've actually cleaned off a little bit of the actual flesh of the plastic on the nubs that actually allow it to slot together, so it's a bit smoother to kind of do this dry fit. And so what we'll do is we'll just slowly dry fit this entire model together, so you can kind of see what you would expect the final product of it to look like. And so we're just going to do it in sequence, each piece at a time. Now, of course, with some of these easy to build miniatures, you won't necessarily need glue if you don't want to. However, it is definitely recommended that you would use glue when you are gluing your miniatures together, as all kits might not necessarily be the same as the easy to build kits. And so there you go. So that is what we're looking at in terms of your dry fit and what the miniature should look like when we are done with assembly. But for now, we are going to pull this out and we're just going to pull him apart. And we're going to lay out all the pieces again, just in the different sections of where they were, so that we are able to see what goes where and what order we are likely wanting to assemble this in. Now, your instructions will have the right order in terms of the way you want to assemble these, so bear that in mind. So, it's at this point we're going to start gluing this model together. So we're going to get our Contact Professional. I always, because it's got a very small applicator on the top, I like to make sure that it's clear. If it's not, you can use a lighter. You can fully take that out, put in a pair of hobby clippers, hold it over open flame, it'll clean it, but be very careful. The fumes are toxic, so it's best to do it outside or in a well-ventilated room. And I'll actually make sure that the glue is going to flow through the actual Contact Professional here. And so as you can see, it is going to start to flow through in a second. There we go. And so there we go. So it does flow through, which is good. So that's a good start. So we're actually going to start assembling this miniature. So when you go to glue, you want to look at where the contact points are. And generally, you'll start off with the dry fit. You'll kind of see how the model goes together and what connects where, because you don't necessarily want to put glue where you're not going to be gluing at this point. So we're definitely going to want to put glue into the slot where it's going to slot into. We're also going to want to put it around this edge here. And so that's what we're going to do to start off with. So with your applicator, you can actually just slot it right in and gently press, and I like to do a small circle as it comes out and just get a little bit in there, because what will happen is when you push the pin in, the glue will fully go in as well. And then as we do, just work it around and slowly but surely you'll apply the glue in all those spots, and then just really easily line it up, make sure you get it slotted in, and just push it together. Now you'll see we haven't actually glued on this side as well. Now it's not too late to do this. You can pull it apart and just very quickly hit some glue on the areas that you have missed, and then just reapply a little bit in the areas that you have already applied some. It'll just help re-adhere the pieces together. And then same thing again, push it together, and then you want to make sure that these two contact as well. There is a little bit of a gap by looks that's being forced, so you will just need to hold it there until it dries. Now it will take a little bit to dry as well, but what you really want it to do is actually contact and get a little bit of grip on each other, because what plastic glue actually does is actually melts the plastic together. That's why it creates such a strong bond. And so over time, we're just going to let this glue together, and hopefully as it does, it'll actually bond here in a little bit, and we just got to wait until it's done. So by looks, it's all good to go. Now something you can do, as you notice, there's a little bit of a gap right at the top there. It's very small. If I bring it a bit up, it'll get a bit blurry. So it's kind of like right around there. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a little bit of the plastic glue, just apply it on the joint, wipe off the excess onto the paper towel, and make sure the applicator is actually sticking out over the paper towel, because it can leak out the top with excess glue, and you can just wipe it off like so. And there we go. So that is the first piece. This is where we're going to talk about sub-assemblies. Now, sub-assemblies cause quite a bit of a divide within the community, at least in terms of painting. So there's two schools of thought. There's the school of thought where you assemble your model in full and you paint it as that, or you do sub-assemblies where you may keep various pieces off the miniature and paint it in smaller parts. So in my approach, it depends on the model that you're working with. So say, for example, the Assault Intercessor we are currently building, when we had it all put together, for example, I was looking at it in such a way where the plasma pistol's kind of a bit hidden on one of the sides, and the chainsword arms pointed right out. So, and then you've also got a little bit of detail on his belt. And so in my thinking, where I'm going to do some sub-assemblies here, the piece that slots into the belt, I'm going to not glue in. I'm also not going to glue the arms on either, but everything else we're going to slot together. So that when we come to painting, we're able to take those pieces off and we can paint those details individually, because they may be obscured in such a way when you are painting it with fully assembled. Now, of course, paint the way you want to paint. If you would rather have the model fully assembled, go for it. This is just a personal preference to me as to why I might paint various pieces in sub-assemblies, because it's easier to get to and it allows me to actually get the same look across the entire piece. For say the plasma pistol, you'll definitely be able to see that. But then also it allows me to then not actually get any paint on somewhere else on the model when I'm working on that part, because it might be too close to the body, it might overlap with something else, it might actually even be touching. So it kind of avoids some of those issues as well, depending on the miniatures. And that's the biggest thing. It's always going to be dependent on your models as to how much sub-assembly you do. You know, some people will do even painting on the sprue, but I would not recommend doing that, and we can talk a bit about why later in this series. But when you're coming to this step where you're putting it together, just look at the model you're working with. kind of doing that dry fit will really help give your mind a good look at the miniature, and you can kind of frame it and go, all right, this is kind of covering up this piece, so whatever pieces are there, I don't want to put that together. But also there are some miniatures where you're not going to be able to do dry fit. The best thing to do in that instance would be to get some blue tack and blue tack your model together, and then that way you can kind of see, okay, this piece goes here, but it kind of blocks this detail, and you can kind of really get a good understanding in terms of, okay, if I glue this in, it's going to block X and Y. Do I want to be painting X and Y? If it's a yes, then you're probably going to sub-assemble that part and just use the blue tack whilst you are putting it together for your priming, and you can take it apart when you're painting and such as well. And then once you are fully painted that model, then very carefully glue it together. And we might even show some examples of how to do that with a fully painted miniature at some stage as well. But now we are going to keep on gluing together this miniature and put it all together for you. Alrighty, so it's at this point that we have actually got the majority of the assault intercessor put together, but we've got the arms left off because we're still letting it dry. We did also not glue in the backpack as well, so then it means that we can slot in this side detail a lot easier when we get it completed. So it means we're actually be working with 5 sub-assemblies when we look to paint this guy up. Now, something you might notice is that as we were putting this guy together, you can actually see there might be some glue excess along the side or along the front there as well. Also maybe along the side here too. Now, what we're going to do is once this guy is fully dried, we're actually going to come in and we're actually going to scrape it away and make sure it looks nice and clean. But we're going to give it a little bit of time so it'll fully dry, so we can jump in to clean that up when it is nice and dry, instead of trying to do it whilst it's still wet, and it will actually cause a bit of damage to the model because the plastic itself isn't fully set, and so it's a lot more, it's in a melted state effectively. And so you'll be able to cause a lot more damage to the way the miniature looks in that part, compared to if you were to wait for it to fully dry than not. So now that we've got our model assembled from its sub-assemblies, we are ready to prime it so that we are able to then paint over it. Because if we don't actually prime the miniature and get it ready to be putting paint on it, if we'll just put standard acrylic water-based paint over the top of the plastic, what you'll find over time is the paint will actually rub off, or it will deteriorate over time, and you'll have to go back and paint those miniatures. Whereas if you prime them, what it does is it coats the surface in a particular color so that it's ready to go to actually receive the paint. It'll actually adhere to it a lot easier rather than just being on the flat plastic. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go about priming, and I'm going to mention them here in whole rather than touching on future videos and kind of giving you all the stuff for priming spread out in various spots. I'm going to give it all to you here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can prime. The most basic way that a lot of people do when they're first starting out is generally via either a brush or it is via a rattle can or a spray can. Now, different manufacturers will have different colors available of spray cans to make use of, and generally your brush on prime is either going to be gray or black. Now, depending on which brand you go with for your sprays, they may have colors in their range that do match them. So say, for example, with Games Workshop, you could use Lead Belcher as a color undercoat instead of doing a black, so then that way you're already starting with your metal. If you're working on Necrons, for example, it's really good there. You've got a solid metallic base to work with, and you can go from there for whatever you're trying to paint up for your Necrons. Whereas if you're wanting something that is going to match a particular tone, then maybe you want to go with, say, uniform gray from Army Painter, and you know, you've got the uniform grey paint in the Army Painter range that also matches that colour. The one thing I'll note about the Games Workshop sprays is that from time to time, their colours won't actually match between the sprays and the base paints that they are for as well. Now, the other method you could use whilst you do get a bit more advanced, and if you do jump into, is airbrushing. Now, it's very basic. You can grab a couple of different primers from various companies. Vallejo make some great primers, but I've got Army Painter primer here. That is what I'm going to use generally, because in Canberra it does get quite cold during winter and you can't necessarily use a spray can outside. And so having the ability to prime with a airbrush is really good. But let me say this now for everyone, I'm not suggesting at all when you're first starting out to use an airbrush. I think too many creators out there say, yes, let's use an airbrush, or let's, you know, do a lot of work with the airbrush. That's not me. I firmly believe that you use the tools that you want to use. If you don't want to airbrush, all power to you. But if you want to, you know, get started with brushes and rattle cans to start off with, and maybe grab an airbrush when you're a bit more experienced in a couple of years or so, and then dabble into that, because it is a full learning process to understand how to airbrush effectively as well, that is completely okay as well. And if you choose not to use an airbrush at all, that is completely fine too. It is completely up to you how you want to go about hobbying. Alrighty, so when we're coming to spraying a miniature with a rattle can, or a spray can as you might call it, for priming purposes, something that is a neat little trick that one of the guys at Jolt, my local game store, Mark, actually gave me a bit of a tip. So before you actually go to use a spray can, something that's really good to do is actually to get a small container that's got hot water just straight out of the tap, doesn't need to be boiling. And what you do is you actually sit the rattle can in it. What this will do is it'll actually heat up the can. It'll actually loosen any of the paint that's actually kind of solidified or is built up as sediment down at the bottom of the can. That way, you're actually able to get a lot more paint out of your can, and that way you can fully undercoat your miniature without having to shake it up a whole heap to get maybe the rattle piece in the actual can itself out of the paint initially, and it makes it easier to use. And it's just something that you can use when, you know, potentially if you're in colder climates. It's something that helps you be able to use spray paints in different climates as well. Alrighty, so now that we've heated up our Chaos Black spray, we're ready to prime. And so even in inclement weather like this, if you're hearing the thunderstorm, it is about to bear down on us. So we're going to get this done nice and quick. So we've actually got the miniature blue tacked onto our spray pole. I use PVC pipe that I have cut into 3 different areas. So I have 3 different poles I can put pieces to, and we're going to spray this. So what you want to do is just shake it up, get it ready to go to start off with, and then nice and easily what we're going to do, I'm going to come in a bit closer for this, is you just want to kind of about that far away, about 20 centimeters or so, and just go across the model. And you want to kind of rotate it as you go so that you're able to get all the different areas. Now this Chaos Black is almost out of spray, so I'm trying to get it done whilst I've still got stuff in the pot. Now you rotate it upside down as well, so you can get all the underside areas. And you want to make sure that you've got enough spray left in the can as well to be able to get these guys done. And also spraying in the same direction as the wind will help you get good coverage. And so just by quickly doing that, and you want to kind of get it all over the model. And so as you can see, we've now successfully primed the model and got it ready to go for base coating. And so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have actually fully undercoated our Assault Intercessor, and it is all ready to go for the base coating. I'm really happy with how we were able to do this, and I've been hankering for the past week or so to actually do the undercoating since recording the assembly and the gluing of it, because Canberra's had some relatively tough weather and my schedule just hasn't allowed me to get out there and do the undercoating as well. So you can undercoat miniatures in any color you want, and from this stage, to kind of give you a bit of an idea, we're not going to jump too far into this, but when it comes to priming, your priming color will also impact the colors and how they will actually behave on the model in terms of the darkness or maybe the lightness. So generally, the 3 different tones that you will undercoat in if you're not using a particular color undercoat will either be black, gray, or white, and each of your paints that you use will behave differently when being applied over the top of any of those undercoat colors. If it's on the top of white, brighter colors will be brighter, your darker colors will be a little bit brighter. Gray is your middle tone, so it'll be really nice to get your darker colors on as well as your lighter colors without them seemingly being too bright, but at the same time also not being super dull and not taking as many layers as you were to do if you do them over black. Of course, colors like yellow and white are notoriously hard to work with unless you're using an airbrush or some other techniques like making use of zenithal highlighting, contrast paints over white base coats, etc. Contrast paints over white undercoats to get, say, Imperial Fist yellow. But yeah, that is where we're going to pick up next time, when we're going to start looking at the base coating. I'm going to walk you through how to go about base coating a model. With the brush to start off with, we may look at talking about base coating with an airbrush and kind of discussing that at a later time in this series as well. So you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is it for this second installment in the From Sprue to Tabletop series here on the ATWN. Really hope you're enjoying this series, and I'm kind of hoping that I'm giving as much information that is helpful for you guys starting out as possible when it comes to each of these different areas and my perspective on things. And of course, it is just that. It is my perspective. Everyone's going to have their own opinion out there when you do your research. And so with these videos, this is just how I go about doing things. So feel free to pick and choose what you like, what you don't, and leave what you don't like as well. And feel free to leave me some feedback down in the comments section down below. If you haven't already, please like the video if you enjoyed it. And if you enjoy this style of content and want to keep on seeing more of it, make sure to subscribe to the ATWN's YouTube channel. That way you're able to be notified as to when we are releasing more content for not just this series, but all the content for 10th edition 40K and the tournament coverage that we provide going into the rest of the year as well. Now, if you do want to financially support what we do here at the ATWN, feel free to check out our Ko-Fi page, and I want to thank my Ko-Fi supporters on there who either purchase merchandise when we've done the ATWN objective markers, or their monthly supporters as well. Really appreciate you guys, because the support you show us allow us to keep on doing what we are doing as well. And so you can support the ATWN by giving a one-time tip, or you can have a monthly membership from as little as $1 Australian a month, or purchase some ATWN merchandise as well that we've got up there as well. But no pressure whatsoever to support us if you choose not to either. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.